Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition, and this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments onto whatever platform you happen to be watching on. They will show up here in my chat room. I hope you're having a wonderful day. It's been an interesting weekend in the world. It's an interesting time in the world. And I will take a moment to just make a shameless self plug to remind you that I spent much of last year warning you about Project 2025 and that this was a serious concern. And, I must point out that so far it appears to be being enacted in just the way they said that it was going to be enacted, very, very quickly and from the first day. Therefore, we must assume that it will continue down that line. I have nothing else to say about that except that we should be paying attention to this. We must continue paying attention to this, and we need not to waste our energy in silly fights and distractions when there are important things going on in the world that could be seriously harmful to us in a variety of ways. But that's not my subject for today. My subject for today is building community projects, which I see as one of the various answers to this challenge. And the reason I chose this particular subject for today is that in my Facebook memories, today I received a memory from 14 years ago, which was my last face-to-face meeting with Abby Willowroot. This day, 14 years ago, she called me unexpectedly to say that she was in the neighborhood in Salem, Massachusetts, and she stopped by the World of Witches Museum, and we had a lovely visit. I got to show her the museum, talk about what was going on in her life, um, and that was the last time we physically met. Now, we did speak a number of times after that, but physically that was our last meeting. And it was very, very good to be reminded of that and to be reminded of that wonderful person. And if you're not familiar uh, with Abby Willowroot, she did many, many things. She was a prominent high priestess in a number of different traditions, including the Corellian tradition. And she had a number of important projects over the years and was a very well known artist. Several pieces of her work are in the permanent collections of the Smithsonian Museum, which is um, the Smithsonian Institute, which is a big deal for an artist. But her biggest thing in terms of the pagan world was the Goddess 2000 project, which was the first big international, intertraditional, successful effort in the pagan community, which really was able to draw people together from all kinds of different backgrounds on a single project without the kind of political nonsense that was so often the case in those years. And this was at the in the middle and the end of the 1990s, the same time as the Great Witch Wars. But they did not touch this project. And this is, to me, a very important lesson in how to bring disparate people together. And I'm very grateful to Abby for having taught us all how to do this. And what she did is she found a common interest, in this case, art and the divine feminine, and she created a social project that had nothing to do with anyone's theological differences or the status of their different traditions or organizations. It was an individual effort in which people could express themselves and their love for the divine feminine. And people came together beautifully to do this with no arguments, no problems. It was a glorious thing. And it's wonderful to be reminded of that, not only for the beautiful memory, but for the lesson that's here. The Goddess 2000 project had its slogan as a goddess on every corner. And it was nothing but creating goddess artwork and displaying it. Abby put it together. Ed the Pagan was very strongly involved in this. It was a wonderful project. And again, it succeeded because it avoided all the controversial things that might have caused separation. Since then, there have been many large projects like this which have been able uh, to to duplicate that non-political aspect. And what I want to talk to you about today is why that's important and why it's particularly important to us now. As we deal with the various challenges that are presented to us through the Christian Dominionist movement, it is very important for us to be able to work together in how we respond to this. It's not necessary that everyone works together, but those of us who can must. And the examples of how to do that are very important for that reason. And anytime people have tried to come together in any way that involves any sort of um, ranking or classification of the various traditions and organizations, it ends up in a war. That sort of plan is an absolute guarantee of disaster. But when we come together in this kind of social circumstance, when we come together around a shared goal and project, we're able to work together, and we've done it in many ways. We've done it to raise funds for disaster relief, including recent examples and older examples as well. We've done it for things like Pagan Pride Day, which is for public notice. We've been able to do a lot of things where we come together in ways where we work together and don't fight each other, because it is a low pressure social project. And I want to talk today about the importance of that kind of project and why we need to continue doing that. And I'm just taking a moment to see if I'm actually going out anywhere because I see no one in the chat room. And I don't know. Hopefully I am. Um, no, there I am. Okay. I'm going out at least some places. Perhaps people are just busy today. But when we look at something like Pagan Pride, for example, or the Pagan Expos that it was based on, this was a way for people to come together, particularly um, pagan groups and pagan artisans to come together and to showcase themselves to the public, but without attempting to um, form any. Oh, and now we have people in the chat room. Hello, invisible friend. It's good to see you. Hello, Renee. It's good to see you. I wonder sometimes um, whether we're going out because there have been occasions when we don't, and it, um, it always is in the back of my mind whether we're going to all the places we're supposed to. I know there are a couple of pages that I intend to send this program to that it doesn't end up on, and this is one of the various technical things we have to solve here. But when people come together for a pagan pride, there's never any aspect of whose tradition is better or more legitimate than any other, or whose temple is in good standing or not in the local community. It's about people coming together. This is the kind of format that we are going to have to really make any kind of joint effort, I think. Another thing that's been very successful over the years are pagan coffee nights or pagan social nights. which again are not about any kind of organization of different groups, but rather people coming together to share social time from many different groups which are not in competition. There is a lot of competition in our community between the different traditions and groups, not always in very positive ways. And everything we can do, in my opinion, to not indulge that competition, but rather to create, again, these low pressure social coming together situations is going to be to our benefit. This would be the worst time for us to be worrying about um, personality clashes, differences in traditions, etc., even though that energy is certainly still out there. And to be honest, I kind of take the point of view at this point that anyone trying to start a witch war in this political environment is really damaging our community even more than previously. It is very important, I think, for us to to be able to come together peacefully, to be able to work together, and whatever differences we may have, for the most part, to set these aside. Now, I'm not saying there's nothing that that might be exempt from that, but I am saying for the most part, we need to focus um, on what we share in common, including the adversaries we share in common, because they certainly are united. And disunity is going to be probably, I think, our greatest danger. If we look at Caesar and the invasion of Gaul, um, there were many powerful tribal groups in Gaul who had lots of people, lots of weapons, lots of energy. And if they could have come together, Rome would never have taken Gaul. But they could not. They could not set aside their differences. They could not unite under one banner, even for the moment, for their own self defense. And Gaul became a Roman province. Um, to some extent, the same thing happened in Britain. Rome was able to conquer Britain partly because of the division between the native kings, some of whom chose to side with Rome for their own political purposes during the ultimate invasion of Britain. When we look at our own situation, we have a large community, depending on where we set the barriers of that community. We have a lot of energy, we have a lot of ability. The extent to which we can work together is probably our greatest weakness. Um, Granted, we'd be better off if we had bigger numbers than we do, but that is part of working together, isn't it? Um, so often, it seems like our community wants to break itself down to the smallest numbers. And those numbers are not going to be able to defend themselves. So as we look at our various traditions and organizations, we really need to ask ourselves, how can we work together for our common defense? Um, and you may say, well, what do we need to be defended from? And I will point you right back to Project 2025 and suggest you look there. Hello to Unique One in the chat room. It's good to see you. The Christian nationalist movement really does not have room in their world for us. Whether they will come directly at us is another question. But many of the communities with which we overlap already feel themselves heavily under attack, and undoubtedly will be more so. Um, those of us who belong to multiple minority communities, in some cases, already have good reason to feel under attack and feel that our rights are uh, disappearing before our eyes. And the idea that um, our religious rights are going to be any different. Probably not our right to practice, but our ability to represent ourselves publicly, uh, our our social equality, and our legal standing. I think all of these are going to be in serious question. And I would not be surprised to see another attempt at something like the Helms Amendment. I've talked about the Helms Amendment in the past. And hello to Dottie the Psychic, who says, thank you for talking about this. Thank you, Dottie. I talk about it woefully often, I'm afraid, and probably will continue to. Although I try to include fun subjects too. But the Helms Amendment back in the late 1980s was an amendment to define religion in such a way as to include anything that involved the term witchcraft. It was an attempt to create an amendment that would have made our um, pagan religions, for the most part, um, no longer classified as religions in the United States. Now, this was defeated at that time. As I recall, it was rather well defeated. Uh, but if it were introduced again today, would it be? Um, and, I think with the dominance of Christian nationalism in the current government, I'd be very surprised if we don't see this. Now, will it pass? I'm not certain that I believe it would pass, but I believe we must take it very, very seriously. And the only reason I question whether it might pass is that that some of the larger religions might worry about the precedent, but in many other ways, I think that we have every reason to think that our freedoms and rights are going to be in great danger in coming years. One of the things that we've talked about over the 20 odd years we've been doing these videos, um, doing video broadcasting through Magic TV/Corellian TV, is the regulation of the psychic arts. In many parts of the country, psychic reading either is outlawed or licensed. Um, where it's outlawed, it's on the premise that psychic ability does not exist, and therefore it must be seen as a fraudulent practice. There's been a lot of work over the years to combat this, and for the most part, you can work safely as a psychic in most any area today. Um, but will that be true tomorrow? Is that not likely to be something relatively easily attacked? Um, there are still ways to deal with that, but for professional psychics, that ought to be a concern. And what is the defense to that? What is the response to that? When we look at our various pagan churches, if there were to be a change in the law that were to somehow exclude us from 501c3 status, as the Helms Amendment attempted to do, what would we do? Now, um, if you're a solitary pagan, you probably don't understand why I'm asking that. If you belong to a small coven, you probably don't understand why I'm asking that. But if you belong to a major organization, you understand the benefits of that status, um, and why it's important to have that status. It allows you to do many things that would be much harder otherwise, um, including our broadcast work. Um, and the idea of losing that, although certainly the vast majority of us existed before we ever had that status, or many of us anyway. So We do know how to deal without it, but it would be a serious loss, and more importantly, it'd be a loss of our moral equivalency. Right now, our pagan churches are legal churches like any other, and this is a very important point. If we lose that status, we've lost a lot. We lose a lot of legal protection. We lose a lot of legal rights if we lose that. Um, for psychic workers, as I say, if there were to be, again, a major action against psychic reading, that would be a great loss to a lot of professional psychics. It would make it very hard to pursue their avocation. Um, Dottie says, we, the local pagan community, have a nonprofit. It would be a hit, but we are born of these mountains and we aren't leaving. Well, that's true. And, I would say the same. But, this brings me back to something I've often talked about. I grew up in a family that was practicing the same religion I practice now, Correllianism. And I grew up in an atmosphere of great secrecy and fear of wider society. We certainly survived. We certainly did the things we did. But living in that kind of fear is not desirable, particularly as a child. Um, and I don't recommend it. I don't really want to have to return to that. Can we? Yes. Anyone who thinks it's a good idea or is looking forward to it, I think, is misadvised and probably doesn't remember what life was like at that time. And that reminds me of what I often like to say about those people who talk about the good old days before we were mainstream. If they think they were the good old days, they probably weren't there. Yes, we survived. Yes, we had somewhat of a community. Um, yes, it was possible um, to get metaphysical services and supplies, but far more difficult. But would I trade the world we live in now for the world we lived in then? Absolutely not. Um, and that's kind of what we may be looking at. Um, it's a serious concern. And again, how do we answer that? Well, we can answer it through what we do ourselves, and we can answer it through what we do as a community to the extent that we can come together, which is why I come back to those large community projects that have succeeded by leaving the intertraditional politics out of it. Um, I think this is a time when we must absolutely avoid that if we can. Though, as I always say, those who want to work together should, and those who don't need to. Um, I remember when I joined the Northeast Florida Pagan Leadership Coalition, that was my principal advice to them. If there are groups that don't want to be involved, don't involve them. They will only pull things down later because they don't want to be involved. Let them go and do what they want to do. Those who do want to work together can accomplish a great deal. And that organization did for quite a while. Um, Trying to pull people in who don't want to be involved is basically setting yourself up for sabotage. Um, but those who can work together should find the ways to do so, because things can be done. Now, what is best to do? At this time, I think we're still trying to find out what that might be. At certain points, I think publicly um, standing up for certain issues is going to be important. But I think that needs to be done in a sensible manner that does not exhaust our energy. One of the principal techniques of the Christian Dominionist movement over many years has been to select their target and exhaust them. Particularly in previous years when they knew they couldn't necessarily win in court, but they did know that they could, through sustained adversity, exhaust their adversary to the point they would finally just give up and go away, give up and stop. Um, our energies are limited, our finances are limited, our abilities are limited. Therefore, we need to be sensible in how we employ them. We need not to squander them, but to use them where they're going to make a difference. And that, I think, is one of my major messages for today, together with, again, the best way for us to come together is in ways that leave our intertraditional politics out of it. No one at this time, in my opinion, should be worried about who should be called by what tag, or whose tradition is better than whose tradition, or questions like this, because these are only going to divide and exhaust us. We need to be looking at what we can do as a whole to maintain our position. And, who knows? We may even find ways to improve our tradition if we are resourceful and we use the tools that we have. And we must remember that magic is one of the tools we have. And that we are not passive participants in the universe, but co-creators of what comes to us. And all of these things are going to be important for us to be paying attention to in these coming months and years. It is important that we do not allow ourselves to be psyched out by what may seem at times like an overwhelming situation, but remember what we do have and what we can do. And it's equally important for us not to run off half-cocked and expend our energies where they're not really helpful. And all of this is a huge task. But I believe it's part of the task that we have come to be incarnated at this particular time to do. And I think that our voice will be important, our actions will be important, and not only for ourselves, but for other marginalized communities. And I do not believe we are here by accident. Now, it would have done us far more good to organize and prepare for all of this years ago. And some of us have been talking about this for years, but as a community, we were not willing to do that. And, that is as it is. There's no point in worrying about that. But I will say to you that those of us who warned you this was coming, remember us. And those of this community who said, oh, that's just fear-mongering, that can never happen, remember them too, in terms of where you take your next advice. There were a lot of people who said, oh, there's nothing to worry about here. And they were wrong. And it's very important, I think, that people remember who dismissed this threat too easily. And yeah, there we are. And what all can we do at this moment? One of the most important things we can do is make sure that we are backing up our information. Because one place where we could very easily be attacked is in our archives and our storage of our information, because so much of it is online and so many people are storing it in the cloud, where it is beyond their ability to physically do anything with it. We need to be taking charge of our records, charge of our videos and our archives of publications and books and so forth, and making certain that they are safeguarded for the future. Um, because one of the best ways to destroy a community is by destroying their history, and we need to make certain that our history is safe. Um, and there are so many other things I could say about this, but but these are some of the main points I want to make. And with that, I see we've come to the end of our half hour. We want to take a moment for a word from our sponsors. Why? Because we love our sponsors, and our sponsors keep us going. And here we go.
Ready to unlock the secrets of the universe? Join me, Rev Don Lewis, for my metaphysical and magic auctions at Gaia Thrift at whatnot.com. Discover fascinating artifacts, mystical crystals, and rare and unusual books that could change your life. Don't miss this chance to bring a little magic into your world. Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions, where the extraordinary can become yours.
And thank you to our sponsors, Equinox Learning Hub and Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions. We had our last auction yesterday. It was a lovely success. We'll have a new auction for you soon. I hope you're having a lovely day. And, we started this broadcast talking about a wonderful, positive experience, the Goddess 2000 project. And I want to end on that subject and just take a moment to remember all the beautiful artwork that people created for the Goddess 2000 project. And what a wonderful, uplifting experience it was to see people from so many different backgrounds in our pagan community come together to honor the divine feminine. People who, prior to that, and hello to Timothy in the chat room, had not been able to find common cause in many cases and had been caught in witch wars between their various traditions. Because of that artistic social banner, were able to come together and learn how they could work together. And that made possible so many other things in the years since. And I hope that it will continue to guide us as we go into the future, and that we can continue to come together in that positive and uplifting spirit, even as we may be faced to focus less on less uplifting subjects, but hopefully in positive and uplifting ways. So thank you for joining me, and let us close with our prayer, as we always do. And Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we ask you to help us to meet the challenges that we face in life and emerge victorious. Help us to stand strong on our rights and our freedoms, and to preserve them into the next generation, and to find the most effective ways to do this. Help us to find ways to march forward into the future and to keep the world safe for paganism. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love. Knowing you're always with us from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. May you be blessed now and always. I thank you for your presence, and